All right, looks like we're live. Hey, Shelly, Dollhawk, welcome, welcome. Hope you guys didn't miss me too much yesterday. I actually could have streamed. I ended up not going to the appointment with my wife for much needed rest, but I didn't. It's because she had two appointments actually out of town, and one was really early, and then she wanted me to drive out there in the other car, and I was like, it's not the best use of gas right now. I'll be at the next one. So, but yeah, the everything went fine with her, and then I just took the day off, literally, other than making dinner. I made burgers and fries, and I make fries from scratch generally, which takes it's a bit of a process. So, but yeah, uh, could have streamed yesterday. Thought about it. Thought about streaming over on the XIV the memes because we did our video, which you guys probably watched uh, Wednesday night, and YouTube struck it later on, but not for probably anything you would think. Supposedly, we were endangering children by showing certain images. I would assume the Soph video I played, and that that made me wonder. And they also, by the way, they didn't give me a warning or an actual strike. They just removed the video, and they were like, "Oh, maybe you weren't aware of this policy or that you inadvertently did this." And I was like, "Well, that's good enough. I guess I won't push back on it because got to choose your battles. Wasn't a big deal, but yeah, you can still watch that over on D Live if you wish. As far as I know, in fact, I have it up right here. Um, so that is there. Uh, I don't know what Tank's got going on. Like I had initially set everything up, but I don't know what he has going on with backup sites for that channel because I kind of let him handle it basically, right? Um, but just saying, if you wanted to rewatch it for any reason, it's just us going through a bunch of spicy memes. Nothing. Most of them weren't even spicy, but a few toward the end were. Uh, but I don't think anything was too bad. I feel like we took a pretty moderate approach on most of the issues. So yeah, lack of sleep can definitely. Oh yeah, absolutely, Shelly. I'm not a deep sleeper generally speaking, so the only way I get well rested because I'm also a short sleeper, but generally the only way I get well rested is when I'm quite exhausted, and this has not been uh, as bad as it was a few weeks ago as far as sleep. I just had like one night that was just really bad, and I've been super busy since last week. I mean, it's like it's been go 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 go. So yeah, I just was like, my wife was trying to get me up at 8:30 or 9 in the morning, and I was like, no, no, man, I can't do it. I gotta sleep. Sorry, love you, but uh, and her appointment again wasn't till way later, but is what it is. But yeah, over on the Insta for the memes, that did get pulled, but no strikes or anything, like I said. And it was an interesting thing because they're like, oh, perhaps child explicitly sexual positions or whatever. And I'm thinking that must have been the Soph video. So what are they going to do when gay pride comes around and they show all these kids in the streets? Are they going to take down all those videos? Because I'm sure most of those are still up all over the place. So it was a really interesting thing. And I first saw it, had already watched the show. I had a few drinks, or sorry, yeah, I had a few drinks. I was rewatching the show, um, and it was a nice night. I was just sitting outside watching on my phone, and I was trying to look at the chat because I wasn't able to engage with the chat much. And all of a sudden, it stopped playing. But I had come inside and pulled it up on my laptop, and I was just following along on my phone with the chat and letting it play on the laptop. And my phone stopped running it, but my laptop ran it, which was weird. But sure enough, it was taken down. So no biggie. you know, it's a live show. Uh, Unfortunately, if you guys, like I said, want to watch it, you can't unless you go over to D Live for however long it is there. Of course, if you want it that bad, go ahead and rip it. I did that yesterday myself, just for prosperity's sake. So, in any case, how's everyone doing today? You like the FBI story that Tank pointed out? Yeah, they do that all the time, Shelley. It is a very common thing for the FBI to basically entrap folks. It's their modus operandi. Um, what do we got here? Just checking the other places, guys. I did get a new sub over on D Live, so appreciate that. Vegan Realist. Hopefully, you're a vegan by choice and not one of the annoying ones because you might not like my channel after a while. I don't really care if you want to be a vegan, honestly. I don't find it will be sustainable in the long run. And human beings are actually meant to eat meat. That's pretty obvious from anthropological studies and human remains, and how agrarian societies have actually made us shorter, our bones more brittle, our jaws more crowded, our teeth rot out, and all these other things, which isn't a thing in hunter-gatherer societies. And if you want more proof of that, go read on the works of Weston A. Price, who figured this out 100 years ago, and no one listened to him until recently. Hello, Holly. Happy Friday to you as well. So, guys, I don't know. Depends on how much endurance I have today with the stream, but, I'll probably go 2.5 hours at least, maybe 3 hours. You guys know that I must have been really tired Wednesday because I started the stream an hour early and had no freaking clue that I did that until I was like an hour and a half in. I was like, wait a minute. It's 3:30? That's not right. uh, yeah, no joke. One more hour. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, and that was the thing is my weekend was baby shower and then fights, and then the fight thing seemed like fun, but I hosted that. So we did the baby shower at my mom's house because it's larger, my mom and dad's. But my wife's friends who from out of town and a few friends of ours locally came over here for the fights, and then I made a ton of food. So I tend to not know how to cook for less than like 20 people in general. Um, I try to pare it down a good bit with my family, but I'm still usually cooking for like, even though there's three of us right now, well, three and a quarter, whatever the bun is right now. Yeah, I do tend to cook for, more people than needed, but I do like to have leftovers. So, anyways, I told you guys Wednesday that I was going to talk about this article from 538, and I wanted to talk about it because it just came out on the 17th, but also just the ridiculous claims that it asserts over and over and over again. And then I have, I pulled up some other articles that are in opposition to this, but sorry guys, I just saw something in my bookmarks here that I guess this was in the wrong folder. I wonder if I can move it. Yep, there we go. Anyways, I pulled up a bunch of bookmarks so that I didn't have to max out my tabs and screw up the stream, because that seems to happen on occasion. Eventually, obviously, if you guys donate here or whatever else, or as the channel grows, I'll probably update my equipment. It's like the mic I have, my video camera, all that stuff, even my computer. Man, they're at least 4 years old, so there's probably better equipment, and I'm using like an all-in-one touchscreen. It's not the most high-tech, up-to-date thing. I don't have the best setup right now, but it works. So, and of course, you guys hear me complain about my mouse situation all the time, but I'd rather go with a slight inconvenience than just spend money on another mouse that, even though I know it's probably going to be like 30 or 50 bucks, it's still not worth it. In my opinion, it's just a luxury to have something that's a little bit more efficient. And I don't know. I'm frugal like that. So, anyways, from 538, how the Republican push the restrict voting could affect our elections. The Republicans push to restrict voting. Did the Republicans ever push to restrict voting? I'm pretty sure that the entire party history of the Republican Party has been to allow as many people to vote as possible who were eligible to vote. Now, I don't know of any poll taxes or any sort of literacy tests or any sort of other laws that were during the Jim Crow era that were imposed by Republicans. Perhaps somebody, the author here particularly, could bring this to light for me. But the fact that we want voting, I'm not even a Republican, but I'm just saying that people want voting to be basically traceable, auditable, identifiable to prove who you are. It's like the thing with the Social Security Administration the other day. I showed you where there are 6.6 million people, 6.6 million on the Social Security rolls who are over the age of 112. That's a problem. And that amount of number of votes is a problem in a tight election. That number of votes alone could have changed our election. And magically, perhaps it's legitimate, but magically we had 30 million new registered voters this past cycle. And if anything other than, gaslighting and propaganda media, getting people to come out and vote, I don't see that number rising that much. Maybe 10 million more new voters, I could see that. But 30 seems pretty insane. And then you have, of course, the people complaining about Arizona doing an audit, which is like, well, if I won fair and square anything, would I not want to prove it if people called me a cheater? No, don't look into it. No, it was perfectly fair. It was the most secure ever. Don't look into it. Don't look into what is going on here because you're just trying to undermine the process. But morons 100% buy this stuff. Which, by the way, if I have time, I'm going to get to a video from the Jolly Heretic, Professor Hutton, because he has a really good video he put out yesterday about Malthusian cycles and the overpopulation issue. And there's some things I wanted to address there that I don't agree with him on. But I think he lays a lot of these things out that are important to understand. And the trending thing that we often talk about of industrialization actually making people stupider. That civilization actually makes people dumber. Technology makes people stupider. And the reason why is because we select and we allow for, especially under welfare states, we allow for the worst of the worst and the most degenerate in the gene pool to survive. Now, I'm not any sort of extremist. I don't want those people to die or anything like that. What I'm saying is that we prop them up. Look, folks, the reality is that I'll put it another way. We have people who are in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who are basically feeble, fragile, old folks that are obese, have all kinds of disease, have diabetes and heart disease and everything else, and they would never have made it given that they didn't have the medical technology that we have today. Like, they never would have made their lives last that long, nor would they have the opportunity to become that obese or to become diabetic. That is literally a modern phenomenon in the last 40, 50 years, and primarily a phenomenon of the federal government here in the United States, the McGovern Commission specifically, pushing dietary guidelines that were completely backwards, wanting you to eat seed oils, corn oil, everything, basically polyunsaturated fat, which is highly unstable and causes your body to break down, essentially. And then they also encourage trans fats. We need very little polyunsaturated, and trans fats were never found in nature before. A trans fat, if you weren't aware, which you should know by this point, is a hydrogenated polyunsaturated fat generally, which makes it saturated. And it's not. And that has to do with hydrogen bonds, and that they pump it full of all this hydrogen until it sticks to the molecules, which is what saturated fat is. But that conflation there between trans fat, man-made, and naturally occurring is where all the studies come from, essentially, that saturated fat is bad for you, and then that gets in the zeitgeist, and people just repeat it because people are stupid and they don't think. In any case, let's go on with this article. In the aftermath of the 2020 election, Republican lawmakers have pushed new voting restrictions in nearly every state, for making it harder to cast ballots early to increasing the frequency of voter purges. At least 25 new restrictive voting laws have been enacted. Hold on. So you're going to tell me purging the voter rolls is a restriction? So taking dead people off, or people who don't live in the state anymore, or in the county, or in that voting area, that district, taking them off the rolls is restricting votes. Your logic does not stand, 538. And by the way, folks, 538 has interesting, good articles on occasion. But this one's garbage. Well, Emmanuel, I appreciate that. Thanks for reaching out, bud, into my chat. If it goes down, could you tell me if you're still here? Will it come back up, or do I have to make a new stream? Obviously, I'm already streaming. I know how Entropy works. I can just sign back in, right? As far as I know. But the only people watching over there, by the way, are me and, I don't know, someone else. One person. So at least 25 new restrictive voting laws have been enacted, with more potentially on the horizon. Now, we could go through all this, but their claims are just nonsensical. I could go through every link here. Again, this is a very biased article. The GOP has introduced such measures in the name of election integrity. I like how they quote that. Election integrity. Like there wasn't a whole Time magazine article about election fortification. I'll need to make a new stream. It's back up, though. No worries, man. Appreciate you reaching out. I guess when it goes down, it goes down. Whenever you guys do what you do. I'm not that worried about it. Appreciate the heads up, though. Hey, Sam. Thanks for joining. But at the heart of this effort is former President Donald Trump's baseless claim that the 2020 election was stolen from him. Is it baseless? Is it really baseless when all the courts throw out all the evidence? You have all the people come up and say, hey, these things happen. Look, guys, we know that people got ballots in the mail that didn't live where they were at. We know we found ballots laying around. This obviously is not baseless. This is, we won, shut up and take it. And we're just going to gaslight everybody into believing otherwise. And they will. They will, because most people don't care. They're stupid. And again, I'm not trying to put down people of lesser intelligence. There's a reality to this, man, that there's levels to this. I can hang out with those people just as well as anyone else of higher intelligence. But what I'm saying is they don't think about these things deeply, and they just believe, just automatically assume off the bat that these are trusted sources because, well, it comes from a media website, 538. Why would they lie to me? I liken it to a quack doctor holding up an x-ray, pointing to something, going, see, and getting this person to believe that there's something really there on the x-ray that requires expensive and dangerous surgery, says some idiot from African American Studies, which means that you know that they are a complete hack, right? Because that's an intersectionalist type field. That would have been like, oh, feminist studies or lesbian dance theory. This is just evidence of where they're at. So there's no point in really paying attention to what they have to say, right? We had an election that was amazing in the midst of a pandemic, and instead of applauding themselves for it, they went with a Trumpian lie. What lie? What lie? There are questions. I'm not a hardcore Trumper. I would pick Trump over Biden any day. I didn't vote for the guy the first time. Voted for him this time. Talked about it openly. Have issues with Trump. But compared to the deep state, compared to the system, compared to the rhinos and dinos, the uniparty, he's awesome. He really is. And this was a problem I had with every single like hardcore libertarian I know. Because they're like, oh, Trump did this, and that. And it's like, okay, cool, man. When Trump goes away, you voted against him, allowing Biden to get in. And when Trump goes away, all these other things that are 20 times worse will come to fruition that you know about. And I get the idea of, voting for your principles. I hadn't voted for a president in 3 elections prior to that. The last president I had voted for within the elections was Bush, and I really regretted that. And that was just like right as I was having a political awakening. But, I really didn't like John Kerry either. I still don't like that guy. Understanding how new voting restrictions will influence our election is difficult. Political science hasn't found that these types of laws have that big of an effect. This is true. This is part of the many, many articles that I have over here under the bookmarks. So, I don't know why that's there. So here, I'm going to start with this because, well, this is the usual suspect, right? Yeah, remind me later, ACLU, because, I really, really want to donate to your commie butts. Our rights are under attack! Efforts to erase voting rights, trans rights, and abortion rights for millions of Americans. So, no, and no. Well, maybe abortions, but those aren't rights, guys. Murdering people is not a right. Especially the absolute innocent and helpless. And look, I mean, I've known people that have had abortions, but I will give them the fact that they were young, whatever. But it's a sick idea to me that you can't sacrifice 9-10 months of your life for a human being to live and think that you're some sort of hero for murdering innocent babies. So, ACLU. Voter identification laws are part of an ongoing strategy to roll back decades of progress on voting rights. 34 states have identification requirements at the polls. That's right. 7 states have strict photo ID laws under which voters must present one of the limited sets of form of government-issued ID in order to cast a regular ballot, no exceptions. Voter ID laws deprive many voters of their right to vote, reduce participation, and stand in direct opposition to our country's trend of including more Americans in the democratic process. That trend is incorrect, though. We are not a democracy. We are a republic. The founders despise that. It is the progressives and the communists that want this. I don't want everyone to vote. And this isn't a matter of, repealing the 19th for me, although I joke about it often. It's not about racial groups or ethnicities. It's about education and skin in the game. Because if I promise you free stuff and you're a moron, you're going to vote for me. And that is something that the politicians figured out long ago because they don't have any morals or scruples about them. So why am I reading this from the ACLU? Well, because this information they put up here is absolutely 100% false. Voter ID laws deprive many Americans of the right to vote. Millions of Americans lack ID. 11% of U.S. or more than 21 million Americans do not have government-issued photo ID. Are they children? Because that would be the group that doesn't have an ID. Almost everybody who's an adult has an ID. And I know that the ACLU, as well as all lefties, think that black folk are children, but they're actually not. Believe it or not. I know. It's amazing to think that a black person could be an autonomous adult and responsible for themselves, ACLU, but they are. If a person is incapable of getting an ID, by the way, and they're an adult, that's not someone I want voting. It's not hard. And this isn't a partisan issue. This is an issue of reality. Do you want the stupidest people dictating to you your life? Well, that's what's been going on for a really long time, and that's why MTV says, let's rock the vote, guys. Get out and vote. And that's why all the, every single one of the celebrities gets out and they go, you need to vote. You need to stand up and vote. And of course, they always say vote Democrat. Amazing. Amazing how that works, isn't it? I don't want you to vote for either party, honestly. I want you to focus on issue. And I want things to be focused here back at home. Obtaining IDs costs money. Even if ID is offered for free, voters must incur numerous costs, such as paying for birth certificates to apply for government-issued ID. You can't do a lot of jobs without basic stuff like a birth certificate, an ID, and a social security card. That's just a reality. So once again, the ACLU is saying a lot of American adults are children, and we want to explain to you why you should let children vote because they can't get a job. They don't have a birth certificate. I don't know how they don't have one because that's filed almost immediately. Pretty sure when my daughter's born at the birthing center, they do it right there. The hospitals always do it if you're born in a hospital. Underlying documents required to obtain ID costs money and significant expense for lower income Americans combined, estimated from $75 to $175. Yeah, it's a little expensive, but no, I'm sure they can do with that money. And, if it wasn't for your welfare systems, most of these people would not be entrapped into your little slavery scheme, your little debt slave scheme, where you give them welfare and keep them oppressed and they can never move up because they're afraid to go work a real job because the real job doesn't pay as much as their welfare benefits. I know some big brain lefty out there. That's not real, Bill. That doesn't happen. It 100% happens. You are an idiot. I have worked with these people in real life. You're a freaking moron to contest this. And you can go, well, I have this study or I have that study. Yeah, you have some bias study that threw out half the data like Ansel Keys did when he came up with his hypothesis that cholesterol is what killed you. Fat's what makes you fat and it makes you get heart disease. No. What he did was any data point that didn't concur with his data points he threw out because that's what ideologues do. They don't care about evidence. They only care about perpetuating their ideology. And if something doesn't agree with their ideology, well, it must be false and we can't look into it and let's not change our mind. Let's not follow the evidence or the truth. Let's follow our emotional state, our emotional appeals. And then the travel required, again, this is nonsense. In Texas, some people in rural areas must travel approximately 170 miles to reach the nearest ID office. One, I don't believe that. But I do know there are some Texas counties that only have like 3,000 people in them, from what I understand, or 1,500 people in them. Do you think those are all black people, though? Because that's what this is about. They're using disingenuous arguments. Voter ID laws are discriminatory. Minority voters disproportionately lack ID. Nationally, up to 25% of African citizens of voting age lack government-issued ID, compared to only 8% of whites. Well, how do they work? How do they get alcohol? How do they go to Burger King, as I showed you, and sit down with their family? Showed you this the other day on the Ends Justify the Memes. There was a Burger King that had a sign out that you must show voter ID to sit with your family. Not voter ID, ID, that these are your family members to sit with them, compared to only 8% of whites. Well, is that because something is racist, by the way? Is that because there's a percentage of the black community that are ill-educated, basically enslaved by the Democrat Party, and are a subculture unto themselves? I'm sure there's a lot of people in really rural West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, those areas in the mountains, drinking Mountain Dew and basically living in trailers that don't have IDs too. You don't care about them, though. You don't say it's racist against them. But all this is nonsense anyways, because I have, of course, other articles here. And, of course, I'm going to start with Vox, because it's a lefty outlet. Let me look at the chat real quick. I see you guys are in there talking pretty good. You need an ID to buy a gun. What? Let's see. An ID to buy a gun. It's amazing. Yeah, they don't care enough about to get an ID. They don't care enough about the country. 100%, buddy. And that's what I'm saying. This is my point. It's like I'm not trying to restrict anyone's right to vote. That's not a right, anyways, folks. I hate to tell you. There's no right to vote. Doesn't exist. That's a made up, nonsensical thing. If there was a right to vote, people always would have been voting. We decided to have a constitutional republic and allow some people to vote. And as the push toward leftism continued, people asked for more and more enfranchisement. This is like the feminist argument that women couldn't vote forever, and it's like when did women get the right to vote? 50 years after men did. 50, 50, approximately. In some areas, even less than that, because most men couldn't vote, guys. Just was the reality of it. But a lot of really cool stuff happened during that period of the Enlightenment and classical liberalism. And then, we all were like, oh, this is great. We have one of the highest literacy rates. We have a very intelligent society, self-sustainable, not dependent on the government, blah, 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 blah. Hey, let's reverse that course and destroy all of our prosperity and create a Ponzi scheme system in which the entire world can collapse if our economy goes to hell. Let's do that instead. Absolute absurdity. All right, anyways. You need to stand up as an individual and do as I tell you, right? In all honesty, you're too dumb to figure out where to get an ID. Right, exactly. 170 miles is nothing in Texas. No doubt, man. No doubt. It's a massive, massive state. Most states, many states in the United States are massive. I live in a small, state area. Not really, but with Delaware, DC, Delaware, not DC, Delaware, Maryland, in New Jersey, they're smaller states. Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia are larger, but not like Texas, of course. Ohio, of course, is rather large. I never go out to Ohio, though. Not in a long time, at least. Holly says, skin in the game argument was what women were against when giving the opportunity to vote, and they had other more important things to do rather than deal with the politics of men. Well, yeah, and then there was always the idea of the draft, selective service, and of course, men still have to do that. By the way, selective service is slavery, in my opinion. I don't think the draft is a constitutional thing, whether we've done it or not. We were supposed to not have a standing military, and we were supposed to have militias. That is, the individuals would get together and create a posse if people got out of line. Didn't happen a lot because we had of sorts a highly moral society. And they didn't necessarily lynch people either. Obviously, the Lynch family is famous, and we call it, lynch mobs for that. But often they brought them to court and justice. So, people did do crazy stuff like tarred feather tax collectors and whomever else back in the day, so that was pretty bad. But ain't really no different than what we do today. We see people out in the streets, BLM and Antifa, beating people up for no reason because they drove near them. They didn't know there was a protest going on. Plus, making the vote individualistic caused the development of an uninformed voter. Absolutely. Well, very few people are like me, right? I was like, my parents were pretty strict, so up until, I don't know, middle school, I always had pretty early bedtime, and, in like 5th grade or whatever, I would go to the skating rink every Friday, and actually, we lived a couple blocks away. Like, I could practically walk there, where I could walk there, but, it was literally like 2 blocks over. And I would go there and do her thing. And, that's what kids do, which is funny, too, because my daughter used to do the same thing some years later. So does not transcend generations, apparently. But I would go to the skate rink, and then I would come home, and I'd want to watch Miami Vice. I'd want to stay up, and they would let me do that. But eventually, I started to get into, like, news stuff. And I used to watch 2020 every Friday night, and I used to... it was my first exposure to politics, getting to guys like John Stossel back in the day, back when Barbara Walters and Hugh Downs were running the show. So, I've always kind of been interested in this stuff. Just obviously, as you get older, you get more informed, more intelligent. Uh, but yeah, not everyone's as obsessed. Anyways, let's look at this Vox article. So, new study finds voter ID laws don't reduce voter fraud or voter turnout. This is Vox, guys. It's about as left as you get. Strict voter ID laws now on the books in 10 states have gotten a lot of attention over the past several years. Supporters argue that they are necessary to stop voter fraud, particularly voter impersonation. But critics argue that the laws, by restricting voting, make it harder for minority voters in particular to cast a ballot. A new study suggests that the law, which requires certain ID to vote, may do neither. Now, I don't know if that would be true. I mean, it seems simple that if you have voter ID, yeah, people could fake it. Don't get me wrong. But it's going to cut out some of the problems, right? Real quick, before I get into this, guys, I just want to check up on the other streams I have going here on D Live. Just trying to see if there's anybody in the chat. No. And my entropy says I'm still going despite what Emmanuel sent me. So, but if it goes down, it goes down. No biggie. So the National Bureau of Economic Research, this is the study they're talking about. Strict ID laws don't stop voters. Evidence from U.S. nationwide panel from 2008 to 2018. And you love John Stossel as a kid, Val? Yeah. I don't know. I mean, like, I watched them, like I said, Hugh Downs and Barbara Walters were the main people. For me, I always like those news investigative shows. They used to be quite popular. You know, Chris Cuomo used to do one via Dateline, and it wasn't that bad. In fact, there's a really good segment he did about a woman who lied and said she was raped by a dude, and the dude spent like 5 years in jail, and then she finally recanted. Horrible story, but Cuomo did this, believe it or not, before he was a sellout. Of course, he was always a sellout, guys. I mean, I doubt he would even be in the position he was in without his father's credentials. So, U.S. states increasingly require identification to vote, an ostensive attempt to deter fraud that prompts complaints of selective disenfranchisement. Using a difference in differences designed in 160 billion observation panels data sets, we find that the laws have no negative effect on registration or turnout overall for any group defined by race, age, gender, blah, blah, blah. That is that. I don't need to read the rest of it. But Vox wants to go on and say, well, the study from the Enrico Contino at the University of Bologna on Vincent Pons at Harvard Business School found that voter ID laws don't decrease voter turnout, including that the minority votes, nor do they have a detectable effect on voter fraud, which is extremely rare in the U.S. anyways. Not true. Voter prosecution, not persecution. Prosecution of voter fraud is rare. This is a framing device. They say this all the time. We don't know because we don't investigate it. We don't audit it. It doesn't happen very often. And it's not secure because we don't have ID. So how do we know this? This is a statement of non-fact. And I could go to this. I'm sure it's another one of their articles, but I've covered this before in the past. Yeah, it's just another article of theirs, whatever. It's going to go through stuff. So without going through this whole article, because I don't want to take the whole time up about this, let's go real quick to this. Fact Check International. This is International Voter ID Laws, and this is Civitas Institute. So it talks about some discussion about people I don't really care about. It says, during the discussion, Collins asserts that the United States makes voting more difficult than its peer countries. We don't seem to make voting easy for people in this country. Other Western democracies do, he stated, citing the weekend election days and vote by mail systems. He goes on to ask, why do we seem to make things difficult for voters? We don't. We don't at all. This is just silliness. We actually have probably the least secure voting in the world, literally. And supposedly we're the most advanced nation. You get guys like Razor Fist talk about this. His belief is that if they didn't do this, if they didn't cheat all the time, then the Republicans would actually be in power. I don't know if that's true, but I mean, it's a perspective for sure. Here we go. So said, may within the context of voter ID discussion, those comments suggest that voter ID requirements are yet another way that the United States differs from its peer countries in adding burdens to its electorate. However, many countries hailed as more voter-friendly than the United States have voter ID laws in place. Norway mandates that voters present a photo ID, including a passport, a driver's license, and a bank card that includes a photo. Northern Ireland, acceptable photo identification to cast a ballot in person. Germany requires that voters bring in state-issued voter identification card, but they can substitute for another form of ID for that card if they fail to deliver at the polls. Switzerland, a country after my own heart, by the way, folks. I mean, other than the fact that Klaus Schwab is there. But I would, the Schweiz is perhaps not perfect, but I mean, there's a reason why they remain neutral, and it's because there are guns in every home, and it's mandated, and they have a great gun culture, mountainous. They have great free markets there. Obviously, we all know about their banking systems. It's what the United States should be, but we're not. Ballots in Switzerland are issued by mail, and voters who return their ballot in person are required to show an ID and a state-issued polling card to do so. France has voter ID. Israel has voter ID. Mexico has voter ID. Iceland requires voter ID. You get the picture. Oh, maybe you don't. You know who else requires voter ID? Let's see. There's just a little list of countries that require voter ID. Some countries that are maybe not so advanced, maybe struggling with their economies and whatever else. Some are first world nations, but only in America could we espouse nonsense and get people stirred up in their emotions because, well, it's just politics here. Politics in the United States are team sports and polemic. So who has voter ID? Iceland, India, Romania, Malawi, Sweden, Taiwan, Mongolia, Kenya, New Zealand, Chile, Lesotho. I don't even know what that country is. Liberia, Denmark, Belgium, Serbia. Uganda has voter ID, folks. Canada, Cyprus, Malaysia, Macedonia. By the way, every single one of these countries is obviously extremely, extremely racist and hates minorities. Obviously. Denmark, Belgium, Serbia, Uganda, Canada, Cyprus, Malaysia, Macedonia, Ireland, Slovenia, Sri Lanka, Madagascar, Switzerland, Lithuania, Hong Kong, Turkey, Australia, Jamaica, Singapore, Bhutan, Luxembourg, Latvia. If I went to Switzerland, I might move to Luxembourg, but I don't trust its location inside of the nation that it exists. Namibia, Thailand, Netherlands, Slovakia, Paraguay. Paraguay has voter ID. Bosnia, Herzegovina, Germany, Timor, Guyana, Nepal, Austria, Greece, Senegal, Lebanon. I wonder how old this is. 2 years old. Malta, Panama, Papua New Guinea, Nicaragua, United Kingdom, Trinidad and Tobago, Moldavia, Morocco. Morocco has voter ID, folks. Imagine that. Spain, Bulgaria, Zambia. And it just goes on and on and on. I'm not going to name every single country. Montenegro, Iraq, Botswana, Hungary, Ukraine, Mozambique, Haiti, El Salvador, Peru, Colombia, Estonia, Czech Republic, and in the United States. Nope. No voter IDs here. So, let's go back. Let's go back and read a little bit more of this 538 article and just see what it has to say. Understanding how new voting restrictions will influence our elections is difficult. Political science has found that these types of laws have that big of an effect, at least individual measures. But while laws that make it more taxing to vote are not new, the current onslaught of voting restrictions and changes to how elections will be administered is not something we've grappled with on this scale. What are you talking about scale for? Each state has a right to dictate its own voting laws. You, people at 538, author of this article, I know what you're talking about. You want national voter laws. You want basically the federal government to do everything because it's always about centralization. When they say scale, obviously when I say scale, I'm talking about descaling. We have to scale down. There's just no two ways about it, folks. We're too big. That we don't represent each other anymore. We don't have anything in common. Look, man, Sam's over in Spain. He's Irish originally, from what he's told me. We have friends from the UK. We have commonalities, but we live in different nations. We live in different areas. I'm not going to dictate to you what your politics should be in your nation. And here in West Virginia, my needs are a lot different than the needs of most people in Maryland, even though I'm 10 minutes away from the border. I'm another 10, 15 minutes away from the border of Virginia. It's the same thing. Not completely. Actually, a lot of the Virginia side of things on the border of West Virginia, they should be West Virginians because the state ignores them a lot, those mountainous areas. But in any case, the point being, we've never seen it on this scale. Well, what do you mean? You mean states following after the lead of other states because they thought that this election was a little sus? Maybe they're trying to fix the problem in voter confidence. Maybe that's the issue. No, Republicans, they're trying to destroy democracy. I would make the counter argument. Democrats are trying to make America a democracy, a mob rule democracy, but really an oligarchy, which is what we are. And we're only that because they've manipulated the masses, the idiots, into this mass voting right idea. Again, this has nothing to do with races, ethnicities. It has nothing to do with where you live. It has to do with your skin in the game. If you work at McDonald's and you're 20 years old and you live with like 5 roommates, you don't ever watch the news, but you hear Orange Man is bad and you go to vote for Biden, you don't have any skin in the game, buddy. Let me just tell you right now, you can be mad at me all you want. You are just a kid trying to figure out life, and you're not doing a good job at it. Maybe you're a manager at McDonald's. Maybe you are doing a decent job at it. I don't know, but we are where we are at with this global government and this out of touch federal government because people have no skin in the game, and they just vote for these folks that won all this. Nearly 90% of voting laws proposed or enacted in 2021 were sponsored primarily or entirely by Republican legislators. Well, that's right, because if it were up to Democrats, freaking everyone who died the last 200 years would be voting every time for a Democrat. And the fact that these laws are likely to have a greater impact on black and brown voters. No, they're not. I just showed you the study, the basic study, and the Vox article. I can show you a dozen other articles. I had one from the Heritage Institute, but I won't use that because that's a conservative source. Here's another thing I wanted to get to. Conservatives, viewers, are better informed about important topics. That's from May 18th, 2021, from Rasmussen. Which kind of brought me to this. This is one of Aiden Paladin's great videos she did a while ago on Political Mind. Who's packing the big brains? It's about who's dumber. This is from a study from several years ago. You'll hear lefties quote, and they're idiotic because the efficacy of the study was not well. And Aiden pretty much rips it apart and shows you the data on that. There's no correlation between intelligence and your proclivity to vote. There is some with religion, but there's none necessarily with religion and political proclivity. Now, you might think that religious people are more often Republicans. That's true in the American sense, but not cross-culturally. So she goes through all that. We're not going to watch the video, but I did figure I would try and bring it up. In any case, let's get back to this article, and we'll cover that Rasmussen. I don't know why I want to say Rasputin today. Rasmussen study here in a bit. Republican efforts to pass new voter restrictions have been so aggressive and widespread, their effects are hard to predict. No, they're not. The studies are out. And by the way, it was the Democrats that had all of the racially motivated voting laws. The parties never switched. There was no Southern strategy. The Lee Atwater interview, anonymous interview, supposed interview, there's no way to prove that he actually said the words he says in the interview, that talks about the Southern strategy, does not talk about the Southern strategy that the left says was employed. No, it talked about, he's saying industrializing the South, which needed to be done. The South did need to industrialize. And in fact, the South is generally more industrialized now than many states in the North because there are right to work laws there where you don't have to join the unions. And you might say, but unions are a good thing. And I would say, depends, man. Any sort of guild or syndicalism is not necessarily a good thing, in my opinion. Although you do have the right to collectively bargain with your work. I believe in that. But there are other things that happen there, and that is a easy, quick road to the way of the commies. And so, Republican efforts to pass new voter restrictions have been so aggressive and widespread that their effects are hard to predict. Elections, moreover, don't run themselves. They're run by people. And these new laws point to an even more troubling problem that threatens to undermine our democracy. We don't have one, though, so screw you. If we have a democracy, then it needs to be undermined because we're supposed to be living in a republic. The GOP's eroding commitment to the democratic values. You mean the Republican values that they're propping up? Like free and fair elections. Did we just have a free and fair election, folks? No one's asking for poll taxes. Fair, though, means that we can track the votes, that they're legitimate. In many ways, the most concerning change our election faces may not be any one law, but rather the GOP's increased willingness to take such anti-democratic actions. Again, I would almost say that given that the right is more informed than the left, this might spur on more people to join the right. So 538 is probably backfiring within their own argument, I would assume. The research on voting restrictions. Political scientists for years study the effects of voting laws on turnout, including what kinds of policies make it easier, blah, 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 blah. If you think it's hard to vote, then you shouldn't be voting. So I don't care about the big brain science on this. Take voter ID laws, which have long been a preoccupation of the GOP. Today, legislation to expand their use is once again on the rise. In fact, voter ID laws are the second most common type of restriction making lawmakers are pushing right now, according to analysis from the Brennan Center for Justice, trailing only in new restrictions on absentee ballots. They're not restrictions. This is completely false framing. They're not restrictions. They're insurance. They're ensuring the legitimacy. The end. But, there wasn't any sort of election meddling when they fortified things in the oligarchy of the Time magazine article, right? Man, this stuff is enraging, folks. It is absolutely complete absurdity, and so many people are just so easily distracted by this and led astray. Much like I told you, I have a friend, a good buddy of mine, who got a 3%er tattoo, got it while he was in the military, and then recently told me he read on Wikipedia it was associated with racism. And I was like, no, it doesn't. I was like, you can't trust that Wikipedia article, dude. There's nothing about the 3%ers. 3%ers represents, the idea is that 3% of America fought in the Revolutionary War. And it's the idea that these people are saying, I'm going to stand for the Constitution. The Revolutionary War wasn't about racism, folks. It was about freeing ourselves from England. And in fact, part of our original draft of the Declaration was to get rid of slavery, right? I read that to you just the other week. It was a problem they just couldn't commit to or figure out, or there was just enough people against it. It was something they couldn't get rid of, unfortunately, which is why we ended up fighting a war over it. Now, if there was a tattoo that represented that, perhaps, but, we could say then today the rebel flag was part of that, and that represents racism, which it doesn't. It does not in any way, shape, or form. It's Southern pride and it's rebelliousness. And if you grew up anywhere in the South, you would know that. And I'm the least Southern of Southerners. I grew up, 10 miles from the Mason-Dixon line. Most people in the South don't consider Maryland a Southern state, but it technically is. But still, this is, I got family in Kentucky and Georgia and stuff like that, and Florida. So we got people all over. But still, I've always identified that way, right? Maryland was a neutral state, so was West Virginia, actually. So such laws are controversial because not everyone has government-issued photo ID. You know what? My daughter is 16 and has government-issued photo ID. Just saying, I'm not exactly wealthy, folks. Access to get one can be a serious barrier. Still, research has not conclusively linked voter ID laws to a decrease in turnout. So what's your point? A recent review found that such laws generally produce, at most, only a slight reduction. No. Now, and there are numerous studies on this people have talked about. But trying to distinguish the efforts, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go through this whole thing. What I wanted to show you was this stuff. The data points. How difficult is it to vote in each state? According to the cost of voting index, I'm sure that's legitimate, and the share of voting eligibility or eligible population that voted in each presidential election in 1996. So first off, there is no conclusive data points here. You can say there's a line trending they put here, but if I saw any line, it would be more this way. And if you guys can see my mouse, but I don't have all the data points that they have. But this says, I'm not exactly sure what this is supposed to say. It says the cost of voting index evaluates the state's various voting rules from the strictness of voter ID law to how easy it is to absentee vote. So my question is if it's easy to absentee vote, why can't I just do it for anyone's name? If there's no way for me to require, there's no requirement that is for me to prove who I am. Why can't I just fill out like 100 absentee ballots? How is that secure? overall voter turnout broke a record in 2020. But the states where it was harder to vote, there was lower turnout. What do you mean by harder to vote? Like, you have to qualify this lesser or harder. I don't know what this data means. You mean more difficult as we go that way? Was it? Was it really? Does any of this have to do with people being politically disenfranchised? The same reason why I hadn't voted for a president in 3 elections, 3 presidential elections. I vote otherwise, but is it a thing where maybe people are sick of politics? So while measuring the effect of a single voting rule can be challenging, put together, the cost of voting index suggests that a state's collection of election laws doesn't influence voter turnout, with more restrictions leading to lower turnout overall. No, I don't think so. So, man, it's a really long article, guys. I would like to go through it all, but, I've been streaming for an hour now, and I want to get to other stuff. Maybe we'll come back to it. In fact, let's just do that. Let's go back. We'll go through the whole article, or we'll go through the effects here in these data points at another time. But this entire article is falsely framed. It is disingenuous with its data. And it's all about trying to gaslight people into believing that Republicans are the evil, evil boogeyman. Just like the whole thing with the Georgia elections and who was it? Was it Disney? Whoever it was. I think it was Disney, who's like, oh, we're going to pull out and go to Colorado or whatever company it was because of the new Georgia voter ID laws or whatever there was. And then Colorado actually has stricter laws on the books. So, yeah, we'll just come back to this, guys. Let me check on some chat real quick. You guys been quiet. For me, I have to refresh, but for me, it looks like Entropy was still streaming. Now it says it wasn't, so that's cool. Whatever. I'm gonna hit go live. All right, so back up on Entropy. Well, hey, Will Bill John, just following. Thank you for the follow, brother. Appreciate that. Slowly growing over here on D Live. So, guys, I haven't done the shilling yet. I have to. If I don't shill, if I don't ask, if I don't say, hey, you can donate, then people won't know. And I don't know who's popping in and out of the stream. I know a lot of you are core followers, so hopefully I'm not annoying the crap out of you for shilling all the time. But if you would like to donate, you can do that through Entropy or DLive, or there is a subscribe star in the YouTube description. So you can go over there. Otherwise, please like, share, subscribe. Most important things you can do, because I do want to grow this channel, and that is that's how we do it. It's how we grow. We have to do it in a way that you guys are proactive with it, and I'm proactive with it. One of the ways that I've been able to grow, which I've mentioned many times, is being in chats of shows that I enjoy, and talking to people, and then getting the people on those shows on, or so some of their audience follows, or you guys come over and follow because I was in the chat and you enjoyed the chat that we had. Wasn't really a strategy that I was trying to implement in the first place, but it is something that I've implemented. So, anyways, like I said, I might stream for 3 hours today. We'll see. What all do I have yet, though? I want to get through the 3rd chapter of the Vampire Economy. I was looking at how much we have left of the law, and I don't think we'll get through that today, but it's okay because we can read chunks of it. It's pretty bite-sized. But for now, just so I can get off my butt for a minute, Let's play a little Heaven on Earth. And you guys let me know here if there's any issues with sound or anything like that.
The Rise and Fall of Socialism. Visit us online at pbs.org. You'll find complete interviews and more about the people and events that shape socialism around the world.
Next time, in the East, communism falls, while social democracy is reinvented in the West. What shape will socialism take in the 21st century? Find out next time on the conclusion of Heaven on Earth. By the late 1970s, roughly 60% of the world's population found itself under socialist governments of one kind or another. Communists ruled China, Russia, Eastern Europe, and much of Asia. Third World Socialist governments controlled 3 nations in the Middle East and Africa. Social democratic parties held majorities in much of Western Europe. Even with all its problems, socialism was still in power. Then, unexpectedly, the pendulum began to swing.
In 1968, the influential American sociologist Michael Harrington could convincingly write these words: most of the people around the world call the name of their dream socialism. Despite all the carnage wrought in its name, the idea of socialism somehow retained great power over the human imagination. But even then, socialism's grip on power was coming to an end. Hello, I'm Ben Wattenberg. Welcome to the concluding episode of Heaven on Earth, a think tank special. In this hour, the 2 great communist powers move away from socialism with momentous consequences. In the West, in order to stay in business, democratic socialists relabel themselves the party of business. And among the kibbutzim of Israel, the socialist faithful are tested by modernity, prosperity, and generational change. We begin in China.
如果现在再不实行改革，我们的现代化事业和社会。
In December 1978, the Chinese Communist Party yielded to vision of a new leader, Deng Xiaoping. Deng's plan for China after Mao began with what he called the 4 modernizations of agriculture, industry, technology, and defense.
What was different about Deng Xiaoping is that he was not ideological. He didn't believe you could introduce utopia overnight, as Mao thought he could do. And he realized that in order to bring about change in China, you had to have fundamental economic reforms.
Change lay ahead for the social democratic world as well. The following spring, Margaret Thatcher became the first female Prime Minister of Britain. Central to a campaign, a promise to reverse the legacy of Clement Attlee. She began by privatizing many of the nationalized industries.
Margaret Thatcher's election in 1979 really is an emblem of the first triumphs of the capitalist revolution. A year later, Ronald Reagan comes to office. Soon after that, socialist regimes in France and Spain make definite rightward turns. So while it would be too much to see Margaret Thatcher's election as the beginning of the end, it is a very powerful first salvo and an augur of things to come.
What I'm describing now is a plan and a hope for the long term. The march of freedom and democracy, which will leave Marxism, Leninism on the ash heap of history as it has left other tyrannies which stifle the freedom and muzzle the self-expression of the people.
The accession to power of Ronald Reagan
which happened to come at around the same time as the shift to the right in other comparable societies, all of them had in common, not just Reagan but also Thatcher, the view that Soviet power, the apparently unshakable edifice of the USSR and its Eastern European dependencies, needn't be taken for granted, that its survival was not a given. Why assume that they're going to be our rivals forever? Why not see if we can outbid them and even subvert them? As Reagan took office, signs of strain were beginning to appear in the Soviet Empire. In the summer of 1980, Polish workers defied the communist government by going on strike in the Lenin shipyard in Gdansk. The strike grew into an independent trade union committed to democracy, Solidarity. Soon it could count more than 1 out of every 4 Poles as members.
The advent of Solidarity in Poland was one of the most significant factors that contributed to the collapse of communism. First, by example, the fact that Solidarity, an independent trade union, could come into existence in a workers' state where workers were allegedly happy showed, first of all, that they weren't happy, and second of all, that change was possible, and it was without question a great inspiration to the dissident movements across the bloc.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin faced a crisis in leadership. In March of 1985, Soviet leaders gathered in Red Square for the funeral of Konstantin Chernenko, the 3rd Soviet leader to die in office in the past 2 years. Their choice for a new leader was fateful. Mikhail Gorbachev may have been the last true believer in the revolution's ideals. But his attempt to recover true socialism from the communist bureaucracy would shake the Soviet Union to its foundations. Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev grew up in the 1930s. It was a period known as the Great Terror. Under the rule of Lenin's successor, Joseph Stalin, millions were arrested and often executed. Scholars...
But that never happened, according to the commies today. Or it needed to happen, Solzhenitsyn, his giant, massive work, the Gulag Archipelago, that was all propaganda. It wasn't real.
Say that as many as 20 million people died.
Gorbachev was the grandson of a rich peasant who was arrested, deported. These were called kulaks, and in the early 1930s, the kulaks were all told to go to work on collective farms, and those who disagreed were deported, killed, sent to concentration camps. His other grandfather was arrested in the 1930s, was also in a camp. So he grew up with a very powerful sense of what had been wrong with the system, of what had really happened during Stalin's time, and this probably did have an effect on his later politics.
By the time Gorbachev became General Secretary in 1985, he realized the Soviet system was not only cruel, it was hopelessly inefficient.
Imagine what it is getting an American driving license. It's quite difficult, quite a tedious process. Imagine doing it every day. This is what the Soviet life was. The whole system was based on people, as we said, pretending that they work, and the government pretending that it pays. It used more people where you could have used more brains, and that, I think, ineffectiveness, this swampish feeling of absolutely going nowhere, that was what Gorbachev inherited.
But for Gorbachev, the problem was not with the Soviet system itself. It was with how that system was being run.
One-party state socialism was, according to Gorbachev, a voluntary free choice of the Russian people. He felt that, therefore, he could loosen up the controls. But basically, that would not change one thing that was the most important to him, which is the state ownership of the economy, which to him was the basis of the Soviet regime.
Gorbachev had a core diagnosis for what ailed the Soviet economy: bureaucracy. His prescription to fight it was called perestroika.
In a way, perestroika is rebuilding, transforming things. But I think that Gorbachev still considered it possible that all these things would be done within this centrally planned system that existed in the Soviet Union. That was his mistake.
Gorbachev set out to cut the red tape. But the whole system was made of red tape. For all his efforts, it seemed Gorbachev was running in place.
只有解放思想，坚持实事求是，一切从实际出发。
As Gorbachev struggled to clear a path to true socialism in the Soviet Union, the socialist idea was being redefined in China. Deng Xiaoping said his reforms were creating socialism with Chinese characteristics. Many observers thought it looked more like capitalism. Whatever it was changing the face of China. The country had just emerged from one of the most devastating periods in its history. After the failure of the Great Leap Forward, Mao Zedong launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution. The goal was to cleanse the country of creeping capitalist and bourgeois influence. But Mao's new revolution soon veered out of control. Over the next decade, some 100 million Chinese citizens were persecuted, including Communist Party officials.
Notice the Little Red Book, folks. Now, I covered this before on the show in the past, but the creator of that Little Red Book, the author of that Little Red Book, was not Mao. It was someone within the party who basically made up these sayings that Mao said, or were extracted maybe from things that Mao said. But for the most part, it was just things that he wrote, and this was what people followed. This gentleman that came up with the idea of the Little Red Book was then later on persecuted because he violated the ideas of the Little Red Book, apparently. This is what they always do. They always eat their own.
What Mao did was use the young people he called the Red Guards to literally throw out the party leaders, to rebel against their teachers, rebel against anyone with any position or any seniority. And so it was led to a period of utter chaos in China.
By the way, is that not a reflection of what is going on right now in the United States? Just saying.
In the economy, in the political system. And it was that chaos that totally, I believe, demoralized the population, turned them away not only from Mao, but from any belief that Marxism, Leninism, or any ideology, or any ideological utopia was going to solve their problems.
Deng Xiaoping had been with the communist movement from the beginning and served as one of Mao's closest advisors. But his pragmatic outlook had more than once landed him in trouble. During the Cultural Revolution, he was twice purged from power. Deng's family fared worse. The Red Guards drove his brother to suicide, and his oldest son to jump out of a window, sustaining injuries that left him a paraplegic. But Deng's fortunes would soon change. Mao's death in 1976 gave rise to a vicious power struggle, and Deng came out on top.
When Mao died, Deng was the highest ranking leader left. Several leaders died during the Cultural Revolution, and he came back to power with a few of his old communist buddies who supported him, who were totally disillusioned with Maoist policies, and they were open. They didn't know what they wanted to do. In fact, the slogan they used was, we have to feel for the stones as we cross the river to get to the other side.
In 1978, 18 families in China's Anhui province made a secret pact. They would divide their collective farm into individual plots. They would work independently, and each family could keep whatever profits they earned. If any of them got arrested, the others promised to care for their children.
When Deng heard about this from one of his colleagues, who was the governor of the province of Anhui where it began, he said, don't stop that. He says, let's see how it works out. And when this governor then reported that incomes were increasing and harvests were doubling, then Deng said, okay, this is the way to go. And so he made this a policy by the early 1980s. By 1982, this was a policy in the whole country. Every single commune was decollectivized.
Imagine that. When people decollectivized and they farm for themselves, they become wealthier. And interestingly enough, we figured this out back a long time ago in America under Plymouth Rock. We have a celebration today we call Thanksgiving that is based exactly on this. They had a feast. They weren't doing too well because they had collective rights on the work, on the farming. And people didn't want to work, or people were tired of their wives working for other people, doing things that they didn't think was appropriate for their wives to do for other folks. Nothing sexual, by the way, just waiting on them hand and foot. And when they nearly starved to death, William Bradford said, you know what? Let's change this. Let's make each individual responsible for their own well-being. And once they did that, then they had an abundance. And that is why we have Thanksgiving, folks. In a nutshell, at least.
Deng Xiaoping had a saying that had infuriated Mao. It doesn't matter if the cat is black or white, as long as it catches mice.
Peasants got back their own family plots, and that released this energy of the peasants to earn money. They had economic incentives, and then the villages began to set up small workshops, and they did small-scale things. Then they began to make connections with the international markets, and they would start producing shirts or socks or textile goods. So it was a gradual process.
When I first started as a freshman in college in 1978, our meals did not even have enough meat. By my second year in college, things began to change dramatically. Food became abundant, a variety of vegetables, meat became available. And I felt at that time I could see the change quite dramatically unfolding. And indeed, people knew that's because of the reform.
1984 marked the 35th anniversary of the People's Republic of China. According to the World Bank, China's economic growth had now reached 10% per year. It would remain there for more than a decade. But China was still a communist country. Beneath the rising tide of economic and personal freedom, the political system remained largely unchanged.
In the beginning, Deng Xiaoping thought he could have both economic reform and also political reform. But when the Solidarity movement developed in Poland, there was this great fear in the Chinese leadership that you would have a comparable development in China, a joining together of labor, of workers, and intellectuals. So he began to gradually clamp down.
On May 15, 1989, the Soviet General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev boarded a jetliner for Beijing. His historic visit would lay to rest a bitter 30-year struggle for leadership of the communist world. An elaborate welcoming ceremony was planned at Beijing's Great Hall of the People. But there was a problem.
Suddenly a message comes to Gorbachev or his party on the airplane saying, well, we've changed the plans. When you land, we're going to have some alternative ceremony. We're not going to the Great Hall of the People. And the reason is because that's in Tiananmen Square, and Tiananmen Square is filled with demonstrators demanding an end to communist rule in China.
By the third day of Gorbachev's visit, 1 million people occupied the square and the surrounding area. Once the Soviet leader had departed, Deng ordered his troops to clear the square.
To this day, we do not know exact numbers of people who died in the bloodshed. Some reports say there was thousands, others say hundreds. Probably truth is somewhere in between.
Even though Deng had put down the movement for political reform in China, he soon ordered that economic reform resume. In 1993, the National People's Congress enshrined the term socialist market economy in the Constitution. Still, the Communist Party remained firmly in control.
Deng is a very complex figure. His stature in history will be examined, re-examined many, many times down the road. His end goal is not to dismantle the rule of the Chinese Communist Party. Never was. The Chinese reform, it was able to keep stability, but it has not really fundamentally changed the political system.
Deng and Gorbachev were two reformers who set out to rescue socialism. But they were on two different paths. While Deng focused on overhauling the economy, Gorbachev turned his attention to the political system.
Gorbachev.
I'm going to leave it there, guys. I don't want to do this for ever. Maybe next week we get through this, I'll have something else that's it's a pretty good documentary or something for us to watch over the next few weeks. But yeah, these things they're very important to understand, obviously. For now, though, I'm going to move into the vampire economy. And just checking chat here real quick. And anyways, here I do want to talk about the vampire economy. If we have enough time, I want to, so we'll get through this chapter 3, and that's probably all I'll be doing on the vampire economy. But I was doing some other research, and there's a lot of stuff to bring up because I'm very, I'm very annoyed by the education that most people have, and that most people don't have an education. They have essentially slogans. They have aphorisms, idioms, something. They have little sayings in their mind, mantras, if you would, about the world that are completely false and untrue. And that first portion of this within everything I'm talking about is the idea that fascism is a right-wing precept, and it's not. It has nothing to do with the right wing. That's what the commies said, because, well, they're right of Mao. But of course, China participates in a fascist-style system now, so there's that. What I found here was a excuse me. Was a website called Finding Fascism. I have some articles from some people as well This is from Fee. And, oh yeah, the COVID lockdown save, this is from the LA Times. This was interesting. Maybe we'll get to this too. Column, the evidence is clear. COVID lockdown saved lives without harming economies. Okay, buddy. Okay. Well, one, no. No, there's no evidence that lockdowns did anything other than destroy economies. But, anyways, I wanted to maybe go through some of these things, talking about some more details on fascism, because people don't seem to understand what they're talking about most of the time. I don't know if you all can defend it or not, but there's always a, there's always the narrative that, oh, Hitler was right wing. Well, really? Why did FDR like him? Why did his NRA, not the NRA we're talking about now, but the National Recovery or Administration, I think that's what it was, or whatever it was called. Why was his original head of that a fan of both Mussolini and Hitler? These were left-wing people endorsing left-wing ideas because they were endorsing the new way. That is the third way, which was fascism. That was a centralized control command economy that was socialistic in practice but allowed some semblance of free markets. Sam says, breaking news, study finds water actually be dry. Yeah, right. It's pretty much what that article just said. I have a dozen and one things I could get to, guys. I was just, when I walked downstairs a minute ago, I just told my wife, I said, I kind of missed streaming yesterday. I feel like I need to stream more often because I just have so much. There's so much information, and I'm constantly ensconced in it. So, but yes, fascism is not a right-wing ideology in any way, shape, or form. And again, I will define this as simply as this: that we get that terminology from the French Revolution, and the people on the left were the revolutionaries. They were the atheists. They were the ones who wanted to implement a socialistic style government. And the people on the right, they were the monarchists. They wanted to maintain what they had. Now, that gives fuel to the fire on the left that everyone on the right is a reactionary, that we want to go back to monarchy or something like that. And there are people on the right today, the NRX particularly, who really like monarchy. Tank, my co-host over on the XIV memes, he kind of likes the idea. I'm not sure about it. I definitely don't think that monarchy is the end-all, be-all in the biblical solution to things. What I do know is that the United States is a whole entire different system, devoid of monarchy. So it started off left, and then the right would be preserving anything of that. Well, that's sort of what has happened, depending on what era we're talking about. There have been different political parties in the U.S., but the Democrat-Republican divide, that primary two-party system, has existed, of course, since just before the Civil War. And essentially, the Civil War was the build-up, the empowerment of the Republican Party. And that didn't last long. It wasn't much longer after Reconstruction that they completely fell out of favor. Now, I did a video about that a while ago too. You can go look at the history of who has controlled the government, the federal government particularly, but also the state governments and other local governments, municipalities. The Democrats have had all of the control and power for over 100 years until very recently. And when we look at recently, we can talk about the Republicans, but they're not Barry Goldwater style Republicans, and they're definitely not Lincoln style Republicans. They're some sort of amalgamation of libertarians, maybe some Goldwater types, the neocons, and just the establishment shills, right? It's not really a unified party. Holly says, funny clip of the guy reading Hitler to a crowd of leftists. And cheering the ideas. That to me at least shows that it was not of the right-wing ideology. Well, yeah, absolutely. I'm assuming you saw that here because I'm pretty sure I played that for you guys here, or if not here, over in the Justify the Memes. If not, you should see if you can go find it. I have it somewhere on my computer, but to dig it up right now in the middle of a stream is not ideal. So anyways, let's read this, guys. Chapter 3, Corruption, Money, Power against Absolute Power. That is, money, the power of money, versus the absolute power of the state. Under such conditions, corruption is not merely a vice, but an economic necessity. This is exactly what happens under centralized banking systems, by the way, folks. A German manufacturer, executive manager, factory leader of an enterprise which employs 4,000 workers and a relatively large staff of office workers obtained a privileged position largely because he got along well with a prominent party leader. This does not mean that the industrialist in question is necessarily an ardent Nazi, as a matter of fact, he is a man who makes friends easily both among Nazis and anti-Nazis. He sent a confidential report to a foreign friend about his experiences in Germany today. Amsterdam, May 15th, 1939. My dear Mr., I am here in Amsterdam for a couple of days and take this opportunity to write unrestrictedly to various friends abroad. I know you will be interested in hearing what is happening within Germany. As for myself, my knowledge as a technical expert would not have been sufficient to enable me to struggle along during the past 5 years were it not for the fact that our firm has the backing of a prominent party man who comes to our assistance when we need certificates of foreign currency, raw materials, and so on. No firm in our trade can exist without such a collaborator. As it is, we have to spend considerable money for judicial advice. It is not a question of simple bribery. The process is more complicated. I knew pre-war Russia. In general, bribery under Tsarism was a simple affair. You could figure out how much you had to pay a state official by counting the number of stars on his uniform. The higher the rank, the more stars he wore, and the more you had to pay. It's different in Germany today. Party members who control the distribution of raw materials and similar matters do not accept money directly. You do not offer money to a party leader. You ask him whether he knows a good lawyer. You know a good lawyer? That's an interesting little euphemism there. Who might be of help in proving to the authorities the urgency of your demand for foreign exchange or raw material. He refers you to a lawyer, quotation marks, who gives you a necessary judicial advice for which you pay, and eventually your request is granted. But the fees for this advice are extremely high, much higher than you would have to pay in direct bribery, or than you would have to pay formally to a first-rate lawyer on a retainer basis. There are many cases of which where your judicial advisor, despite the high fees, cannot assist you. For instance, until a short time ago, it was possible by skillful and expensive interpretation of the law to circumvent the law prohibiting branch officers from opening new distributing agencies. A few months ago, however, it became absolutely impossible to circumvent the law, and even the best contract man or lawyer could no longer assist you in a case of this kind. Now, I want to remind you guys that in the previous chapters we read from this, they talked about this, that all the levels of kind of bureaucracy, and that you had to, go through a certain amount of red tape and whatever else. And again, I just wanted you all to get your toes dipped into this. This chapter, I think, particularly gets a little bit more into the corruption, the bribery, and the total mess that centralized control creates. Nevertheless, it is virtually impossible to function at all without maintaining close relations with one of these lawyers. He can tell you whether or not to have a chance to obtain what you are seeking. you come to depend upon him completely. A good judicial advisor knows exactly how far you can circumvent the law in any given case, or whether or not a recent change in party leadership makes it possible to reinterpret a given decree. I cite one of my experiences. I needed foreign currency for my current trip to Amsterdam. Actually, I want to go back to that last little sentence there. Possible to reinterpret a given decree. That's really interesting. It reminds me of like YouTube and other places, TOS. You know, if they're not fascistic in the way that they work, I don't know what is. They take 30%, by the way, of like super chats and stuff like that. Not that I get, any of those, but I'm just saying. They can put ad revenue on any of your videos if you're not in the partnership program and still gain revenue themselves. They can completely control and dictate what you do and how you do it as far as they want to take you down or not, and they're not quite exactly completely clear. They say things like certain medical health experts need to be listened to, certain groups, but then if you say anything that comes from those groups or other very prestigious health experts that basically aren't what YouTube like, they'll shut you down for that. It's the last time I got a strike. So, yeah, authoritarianism, tyranny, it's always the same. Right? Do as I say, not as I do. That kind of thing. He says, I needed foreign currency for my current trip to Amsterdam. The duly made a request for what I needed to the administration of foreign currency. In reply, I received the following answer. Absolutely impossible. I thereupon went to my advisor and inquired of him how I might prove the special urgency of my business trip. He told me something I had not known before. A new ruling had been issued to the effect that factory leaders in my particular line of business could no longer obtain foreign currency for a business trip abroad. Well, I said, what about a personal trip in order that I might inspect some new types of machines for my personal information? This might be possible, he said, but it would cost you 300 marks. I paid the 300 marks and got the foreign currency without further difficulty. Everywhere you will find new bonds of fellowship between businessmen, contact men, and party men who all tied to each other by complicity in violations of laws and decrees. It is a kind of community of interest based on common risk. I shall have to return to Berlin tomorrow. All the best. So that last line there too, I mean, aside from the salutations or the not the salutations, but the closing out the goodbyes there, is that he's saying that they have to violate the law all the time. They have to do things that are shady constantly, just to stay afloat and to keep the system running, meaning the system encourages it. This is exactly how the government in the United States works today. It's probably how most of your governments work if you are in a foreign nation. So I know, obviously, Holly's in Canada, Sam's in Spain right now. So they all have central banks. Now, I don't know how much they regulate there, but we do. I can tell you this, that the Canadian economy is highly regulated from what I understand, and every single individual is highly taxed just for their health care that's mediocre and you have to wait a long time for. So, again, I couldn't tell you every aspect of it, but I do know that the Canadian dollar isn't that strong. And yeah, compared to the US dollar that's totally propped up, maybe that's not a legitimate comparison, but still, Canada was doing quite well for a while as it went more and more free market a few years ago, and that's all been undone by Trudeau, from what I understand. It's not unusual for businessmen to get together and discuss in a business-like way how much has to be paid to a state or party official in order to obtain some favor. Two businessmen from Western Germany, Herr Schmidt and Herr Mueller, set each other in a train on the way to Berlin. I'm glad that it was Schmidt and Mueller, because those are easy names. Said Herr Schmidt, I must get in touch with the raw material distribution board. How much is it going to cost me to approach a party member in that office? Mr. Mueller answered, well, it all depends on what kind of party member you have to deal with. If he no longer believes in National Socialism, it will cost you 100 marks. If he still does, 500 marks. But if he is a fanatic, you have to pay him 1,000 marks. Isn't that interesting how the commies are always grifters? And yes, I use the word commie here, talking about a fascist. I know. They're the same freaking thing, folks. Shades of gray, shades of gray. An Italian economist and editor who is familiar with present conditions in Italy was asked by the author, what are the relations between businessmen and the state bureaucrats in Italy? And by the way, this is just a good place to stop on the, I'm not really planning on this, guys. I haven't watched Heaven on Earth in a long time. It's been a few years. I do refresh myself on that video every now and again because it's just a good overview of the last 200 years or so of socialism. But we just ended on this, that the Chinese were trying to get to fix the bureaucracy. Or they didn't quite, but they got into an economic system. But Gorbachev specifically in Russia was trying to fix that bureaucracy. And he saw that as the biggest problem because that's what deep states, big states, totalitarian states always create is bureaucracy. This is why here in the United States, as we've allowed this to go on over the last 100 years, we have so much bureaucracy and your freedoms continue to be eroded and no one listens to you. And these special interests based on scientific surveys are the ones who dictate over 70% of the policy. That is not a nation of for the people and by the people. That is a nation for the corporations and by the corporations, which is in part why it's fascistic, because the whole system in reality runs very much like Nazi Germany. Not completely. We have actually largely much freer market, but we have a ton of subsidized industries. We don't have truly nationalized industries here, but that is again, sort of semantical or a shade of gray. Not completely, but it's one of those things where the government doesn't really run it, but they dictate it. It's more like, as far as what is nationalized here, it's not on a national level, but often on a state or community level, like our power companies, stuff like that. They're often not independent, right? So again, you have to understand this. And I know the lefty argue, well, Bill, but if we didn't do that, they would do corrupt things and take advantage of the regular people. Would they? I mean, I know this. We broke up Standard Oil back in the day. Standard Oil was a force for good in the end. It actually pretty much destroyed the whaling industry because people could get oil so cheap from petrol that they didn't need to whale anymore for their blubber to to basically have lamps at night. Stuff like that. If you read up on the history of this, maybe I'll talk about it some other time on the show with some data behind it. If you look at the history of this, of how quickly Standard Oil dropped the price of oil for the common consumer through refinement and learning how to diversify the product. That's how we get Vaseline, by the way. That it actually made oil extremely accessible to even the poorest of the poor, and pretty much outpaced the whaling industry. Because if that hadn't happened, we might not have whales anymore. The word corruption is not to be taken in a sense in which we normally use it in democratic countries. Under fascism, it is not primarily the power of money which corrupts, but rather does corruption spring from the power of the state. Well, that's always the truth. It's power that corrupts, period. Whether it be money or state. It's authority. It's power and it's hubris. And then it's risk. So I'm going to take this risk doing this illegal thing, but I know I can get away with it and I'll help you out. Therefore, give me a little money under the table. Whereas in democratic countries, the businessman may use his money to influence legislation and public opinion, and thus operate as a source of power and corruption in fascist countries. He can exist only as a subject upon whom state power operates. The corruption in fascist countries arises veritably from the reversal of the roles of the capitalist and the state as wielders of economic power. Viewed in this light, the statement of the Italian economist is more comprehensible and is well illustrated by the several cases which he cites. Unfortunately, the names and data which he gives to prove his point cannot be revealed, for to disclose them would endanger the lives of those involved. Does this sound like a state that is any sort of free market? You can't even talk about the data in which all these things work. But these cases are so typical that names do not matter. For example, an Italian manufacturer, owner of an enterprise in which his family had worked for generations, produced a certain kind of light machine of chrome steel. Knowing that he would have to replenish his supply of steel shortly, he wrote to the proper state official in plenty of time to avoid any interruption of work in his plant. 2 months passed without a reply. He wrote again and again, stressing his urgent need of materials. Finally, the order permitted him to buy the necessary chrome steel arrived, but there was none obtainable. Meaning he could get the steel finally, he got the permit, but it was all sold out elsewhere. Because when you have a centrally controlled economy, there are always supply chain breakdowns. There has to be, because they're deciding who gets the distribution here or there instead of the business in free markets, which tends to do a larger, better job. We saw this also supply chain disruption, that is, with the COOF and the lockdowns. That was all government imposed. It was not that was not an organic thing. That did not occur naturally in any way, shape, or form. Only a few days supply remained, and he had faced with a necessity of closing down his factory. Then suddenly an angel appeared, a gentleman unknown to the firm, who said he had heard about the firm's plight through a friend in the state office for the distribution of steel. He just happened to know that he would be unable to obtain immediately the required steel unless a satisfactory private arrangement could be made. In which case, of course, he and his friends would use their influence to see that immediate delivery was effected. By chance, he had at his disposal exactly the quantity of steel needed by the firm, but unfortunately the price was double the official rate because steel, especially of the required quantity, was scarce. So this guy had inside information, bought the steel, obtained it for himself, and knew he could hold it for ransom, doubling the price. And again, this is an effect of this centralized, controlled economy. This is a black market, right? And that is always the case. You always create a black market, which is why I don't think that government they shouldn't control markets. They should only police the freedom of the people. They should only police the justice under the law, and that isn't like social justice or monetary or economic justice. None of those things. There should be a separation of economy and state as much as there is of church and state. Now, it doesn't mean we can't have economists within the state, just like we can still have religious folks in the state. Or the government can't use economists to run their own budgets, but they shouldn't be dictating policies to businessmen. And sure, some people might get taken advantage under the free market capitalist system. Okay. I promise you folks, far more suffer under a fascistic, communistic, socialist system any day of the week. More people die, more people starve, more people get sick, more people are poor, and more than anything, there is 1,000% more corruption. We'll get to it on Heaven and Earth because it gets there. But when the fall of the Soviet Union happened, guess what happened? All the folks in the military started selling off armaments to basically other nations that were very interested, often Muslim nations. They did this because they saw an opportunity to make money because they had power in the first place. They were able to do it under the Soviet regime. Once the government fell, it was even easier, of course. All right, back to the text. Such a transaction was, of course, illegal, but the Italian industrialist knew perfectly well that the refusal to accept the proposition would not only result in the closing of his plant, but might mean his denunciation by fascist officials. His business would be ruined. He paid the price demanded, having become a party to an illegal transaction, in which the fascist officials protected themselves through good friends among those higher up. He was thereafter even more at the mercy of the bureaucrats. Ultimately, the fascist state official became a silent partner in the firm, and the manufacturer had no further trouble in obtaining steel and other materials. Basically, this is the marriage that happens. This is the same stuff that has happened in the United States. This is why you see the back and forth crossover of people and administrations and the House and the Senate and the bureaucracy, all the government, federal government bloat. You see all that with the big, giant corporations. This is the same type of thing. It always happens this way, folks. Always. Like, there's nothing unpredictable about any of this, yet you'll be gaslighted left and right about it. And again, I openly state that the left has one thing right. America does have a soft form of fascism as far as how we run our economy. But fascism was not capitalism, and we don't have a fully laissez-faire capitalist system in our markets. We have a centralized bank that's communistic, right? We have many not quite nationalized, but highly subsidized industries, like the majority of the farming industry, the transportation industries, communication industries, social media, all kinds of media industries, folks. If half of you knew or know or had known growing up how bad it actually is here, you would have been outraged years ago and figured this out. But unfortunately, most of us didn't know. Most of us were naive, and most of us have had a very poor education. I'm thankful that folks are waking up. There is some hope. I don't know about on the federal level, but there is some hope with a lot of stuff going on, including just the other day, the 7 counties in I think Oregon, are proposing leaving Oregon. And I mean, they're putting stuff into the government, to the state government, to become part of Greater Ohio. And I don't think making Ohio a bigger state is necessarily a good idea. I think actually we need more states. I'd like to see just about every state, maybe not every state. Maryland's pretty small, Delaware, New Jersey. But some of the bigger states, I'd like to see them broke up. I'd like to see them broke up some more. I'd like to see people being represented better. We can go look at the map, the 2016 election map, and all of the red counties that voted for Trump. I mean, hell, the 2020 map was pretty conclusive. It was only a handful of cities that changed that. I mean, that's the reality. And people can talk about popular vote all they want. That's not how we run our system. It's not a democracy, folks. Never was. The founders despise the idea of democracy. And so do I. Democracy is a good way for the smartest person in the room to be dragged along kicking and streaming while all the idiots decide that, they're going to do something that is horrible for all of society. Or the smartest person in the room is malevolent and manipulates everybody into going along with them and destroying society. I don't like either one of those. Ultimately, the fascist state official became a silent partner. Similar stories could be told about German manufacturers. Rome and Berlin have become the headquarters of many agencies specializing in providing good connections. That is, acting as glorified public relations councils. Excuse me, guys. coffee is giving me the burps. All right. Good connections, that is acting as glorified public relation counsels for their clients. The connections are with state and party officials holding key positions in offices which make decisions regarding the distribution of raw materials and insurance of certificates for foreign exchange, subsidies for exports, permits for new construction, and the like. Large German and Italian firms maintain branch offices in Berlin and Rome, respectively, with staffs of reliables whose sole job it is to visit the proper state officials and party leaders, entertain them, establish good connections and friendly relations. So basically, they're sycophants. They're there to smooze, right? They're the lobbyist. And otherwise protect the interest of their concerns. Smaller firms, which cannot afford such a staff, are served by independent agencies. There are hundreds of such agencies, sometimes fraudulent in the sense that they have no genuine influence, more often with real friends in high places, from whom unofficially and illegally it is possible to get concessions and privileges. New elements of adequately covered. Hold on, real quick. Let me address all this. So essentially what he's saying is one way or another, there's got to be a third party in the system. This is much like our healthcare system in the United States, where the government decided because we can't stop our inflation or our spending and we can't balance our budget, what we're going to do is we're going to make healthcare a matter of insurance, and all insurance is going to be tied to your job, all affordable insurance. So what they did there was they nationalized insurance companies immediately, effectively. The insurance industry is a nationalized industry that they just had to wait for the Affordable Care Act, which should be called the Unaffordable Care Act, because it made anyone who had insurance through their workplace have to pay a much higher rate, and has made insurance for people who work for small businesses or who are independent extremely expensive, all to prop up something like 20 million Americans who they said didn't have insurance, but it didn't matter because they could just go to the free clinic or have it written off at a hospital, or they could get on Medicaid, right? Or Medicare, whatever one it is. I always get those two confused. Doesn't matter though, right? Doesn't matter that other systems were in place. It only matters if a federal system is in place. They had to do it. Most of the things that they stated were lies. The best way to reform healthcare in the United States is to decentralize it, actually, and allow for insurance trading across state lines, to quit subsidizing the medical industry and whatever else. But it will never happen because the red tape is the way. And as you add that red tape, then you create the need for these third parties to intervene and whatever else. It creates a system of corruption. Again, Ron Paul talks about this in the Fed, so we will cover that shortly in the future because it is universally true. It is how it happens, and it is in no way a promoter of liberty. It is only there to enslave you. New elements not adequately covered by the term graft exist in relations between businessmen and state officials in Germany and Italy. It is not true that any capitalist with plenty of money can buy influence of state bureaucrats. The businessman's influence depends on more than merely the amount of cash he spends for graft. A businessman who is an old party member may get many favors for which another would have to bribe a Nazi official. The businessman who has criticized the regime at some time or another may find it advisable to protect himself by improving his relations with the local party leader. For this, he will have to pay, while those who had always made regular contributions without grumbling would not feel it necessary to make an equal contribution to the party. Consequently, many companies have found it too expensive to keep an executive who does not get along sufficiently well with party authorities or whose political record makes him suspect in the eyes of a party secretary. Yeah, and again, we see that. We see that today. We see that companies get rid of folks if they're not woke enough, if they voted for Trump. Not in every case, but this is the same thing, folks. This is how it goes. This is why I'm reading this, because it explains the corruption that goes on now. Nothing changed within human nature. Nothing changed within these systems. I don't care that this was in Germany. It's a different culture. Human beings are still human beings. Culture only has so much influence. When it comes down to systems of trade and exchange and systems of government, that is leadership and organization, these are universal principles. It is economical to replace such a man by a reliable party member, even though the latter may know nothing of the business. Sound like Hunter Biden to you? Does to me. Old Burisma knows jack all about the business, but he's a good old party member, isn't he? His dad's a special kind of guy. But he must have friends in power, or at least contact, through intermediaries with the state officials, upon whose goodwill the concern is dependent. The friends and intermediaries must, of course, be reliable party people who have survived all purges and are still trusted by the government. The very nature of the Nazi Party makes those old party members realists who are apt to exploit their position for personal gain within the safe limits dictated by national interest. They rarely, however, become active businessmen themselves, regardless of how much wealth they accumulate, as they find it far safer to remain in the bureaucracy and levy tribute for the distribution of patronage. It's actually interesting, as I was looking last night, I found an article, I'll probably bring up, when we look at this other stuff, I found an article about basically from a lefty talking about what fascism is, and fascism is late stage capitalism. And immediately within the first paragraph or two, he has completely shown that the guy has never read anything about the economics of fascism, about the philosophical principles of fascism, or the origins of fascism. It is mind-blowing. But this is what commies do. They don't know they never know anything. They're full of excuses. Like I said, they have their little mantras, and they just repeat them. And they keep it simple because Saul Alinsky told them to. This tribute is paid in actual cash, for money has not lost its role under fascism. Even the party badge does not entitle the wearer to appropriate whatever he sees or needs. Money is always going to be around, guys. It doesn't. Commies have money. It's always around. There has to be some sort of means of exchange other than, hey, I have a car. Well, here's 70,000 tons of food. No, we need a more simplified means of exchange. Unless you're one of those like hippy-dippy moronic types that are like, why do we need money? Why do we have to live in a world? Why can't we just exchange things? And it's like, you realize money represents your labor and your effort, right? That's what money represents. It represents something that you created. There's nothing more than that. It's an easy way for us to barter, essentially. It streamlines the system. Money can be anything, though, and it shouldn't be centrally controlled. That's always the issue. Always the issue of corruption is that central control of money. Same with the economy and people and everything else. There are exceptions, of course, such as the raiding of Jewish homes, but homage is paid to the general rule of terms such raids spontaneous. Did I read this sentence before that? So he must have money to pay for it. Oh, yeah, appropriate his needs. Either way. The superficial observer might easily claim that such a regime does not differ fundamentally from liberal capitalism. The superficial observer would. But liberal capitalism doesn't work this way either. That is classical liberal laissez-faire capitalism. Now, if there were things like this going on behind the scenes, between capitalists, between businessmen, sure. But would you rather have that in the free market, or a dictatorial power that murdered some odd million of people, rounded them up, did scientific experiments on them, and then caused an entire war that nearly destroyed all of Europe. What would you rather have? Would you rather have a few businessmen making trades behind the scenes and there be a little bit of corruption and favoritism and trying to outcompete, or sorry, trying to provide some sort of protectionism against other buildings? Or would you rather the government come in and say, you need to have this, that, and that regulation, small business person, or you need to, otherwise you can't run your business. You need to shut down, small business person, but Amazon and Walmart and all the other big box stores, you can remain open. What would you rather have? What kind of free society do you want? Or do you not want to live freely? A superficial observer might easily claim that such a regime does not differ fundamentally from liberal capitalism. Some governmental forms have changed, perhaps, but the role and position of the capitalist or businessman have remained what they were before. Money still rules the world, Democrat or fascist. Such a conclusion would be just as false or incomplete as the opposite one suggested in recent literature, that fascism is a new brand of feudalism in which the private capitalist has become merely a tool of the state, where absolute power has entirely taken the place of money power. This estimate overlooks new features in the Nazi society and the unique position of the capitalist under fascism. Fascist society still relies on a money economy and is driven by money spending and the passion to earn more money. But there is a novel feature which does violence to the essence of liberal capitalism, under which money must be earned through the work or use of capital. I need to remind you too, Riemann is not, he's laying this stuff out, but he's not a capitalist. He is a commie. Literally, he was an avowed communist. Sources of money in the fascist state are open to those who have power, simply by virtue of their power. Nazi officials, though they cannot take what they want without paying for it, are in a position to obtain money for themselves by merely taking it from capitalists who have funds available with which to purchase influence and protection. This power is not illegal, but grows naturally out of the system and is organized and made legitimate by the state. It is exercised by state organizations representing naked power, the SS, elite guard, and regular police forces under the command of party leaders. The fanatics of Hitler Youth Organization, the Gestapo, all led by party members who are personally tied up with one leader or another. Just wait till BLM gets their way, folks. Just wait till all those police are defunded and the feds come in. And Ashley Babbitt is a regular thing. The leaders of these groups operate without the restriction of a constitution or of courts, and they wield a tremendous influence upon the economic and business life of the nation. In this setup, private capitalists who have funds at their disposal naturally still exert great influence. The social background of the Nazi official renders him particularly responsive to the lure of money and the private property. As a former member of the ruined middle class, he lost his savings and economic security in the struggle for existence. His low salary as a state official would seem to bar him from wealth. But in his hands, he now holds naked power, and the capitalist must share his funds with very many state officials if he wishes to share their political power, to win their favor, and thereby provide for his own necessities. And this is why in the United States we have so much lobbying, because we have not a totalitarian system per se, but we have a system that implements many of these things in many ways. And again, it has varied over the years with administrations and Congresses, but it's there. It's in place. Despite the great centralization of power in the hands of the highest leaders of the party, there is wide variety in the role played by the provincial or municipal bureaucrats in their relations with private capital. Certain capitalists are so situated that they share in the power which the party leaders has at his disposal. A big industrialist, for example, who is in the close contact with one of the important leaders of the party, himself becomes an authority to the minor party leader in his district. He reflects the authority of the national leader by whom he is befriended. He might even become a party leader himself, at least of the provincial or district bureaucracy. Herr Weisen and Herr Krump need not court their district party leaders. They themselves are greater authorities than the minor leaders, although neither Herr could defy the will of Hitler. Manufacturers who are important only on a provincial scale will endeavor to gain influence inside the district party leadership, a low rung of the party ladder, while the small businessman will be glad if he succeeds in being on good terms with his local leader. Behind the scenes, different business interests compete with each other, influencing the leaders and trying to get their representatives appointed to key positions. The greater financial strength of the big concerns and trust facilitates their getting into close contact with the chief political leaders. Herr Kurt Weinglit is a leader member of the NSDAP. He is also a managing director of the Deutsche Bank. Furthermore, he is a member of the supervisory board of the Deutsche, big old German words, folks. He's part of all these syndicates, though, essentially, and of other colonial enterprises. The Bureau for Foreign Affairs of the NSDAP is under the leadership of the old party member, but one of its national office leaders is Herr Weiner. Was that Dietz? I guess I don't remember how to pronounce AI in German. Anyways, it's probably the same as English. A director of the Pauschel concern and a member of the supervisory board of the two very powerful industrial concerns, Kolkner and Flick. Obviously, big industrialists have been more successful than other groups in permitting the decisive committees of their party, while the party permeates the whole governmental bureaucracy. Basically, what he's saying is what we see now. Small businesses can't compete with the big businesses because the big businesses have better connection to the bureaucracy of the government and have more power and influence within the government. That's all that really is. Let me see how much more of this chapter is left. Enough that I don't think I need to continue it. We'll come back actually to this, though. We'll come back to the vampire economy at a later date. Again, it's hard to read like a whole chapter of books on here because it's time consuming, guys. It is time consuming. You can only read so fast. I'm trying to bring you my thoughts on this and tell you about the comparisons. I can say all day, all night and day to tell you to read, but the bottom line is people don't read. So we can, I can ask you to read. I can tell you to go read this, but people don't read. So part of what I do, of course, is to read this to you so you have some understanding. But again, I don't want to make this the driest stream ever. And it looks like some of you might have dropped out already on me, which also understandable because I know it's in the middle of the day. So check some stuff here. All right. So, like I said, I had some other articles. I do want to cover this a lot. I have a lot of stuff in store next week. I could read 10 minutes of Bastiat or so. Maybe we should read that a little bit. Read a couple minutes of that. And like I said earlier, I was telling my wife, I kind of missed streaming yesterday. I I was like, no, though, I need to take a break. I need to do something different. I've been running around way too much. But I would probably stream tomorrow if there wasn't fights so early. But I need a day off. Obviously, we're not streaming with Tank on Sunday. Maybe I'll stream on Sunday. You guys just pay attention, check in. I'll the stream. I'll make it. But maybe I'll take Sunday off too. I mean, there's still stuff to do around the house for the baby. There's always stuff to do. Always things to do. In any case, real quick before I get out of here, guys, if any of you are so inclined, please like, share, subscribe. If you wish to give me a tip, if you wish to, throw me a few bucks, do you wish to donate, you can do that through Inchbee or DLive or the subscribe star in the description of the YouTube. Maybe I should set that up over on DLive and wherever else as well. But, until I get bigger, until I get enough people, I don't expect you guys, you should support creators, but I'm not expecting everyone to donate to me. And I am content with where I'm at right now. I'm more content or more happy to see growth on the channel, to get up to 200, and eventually I know it's a low ball number, but I really do. I just want to get 300 subs so this stuff uploads to Odyssey by itself. Let's see. So we left off as from the law, Bastiat's The Law, Socialist 1, Forced Conformity. Be that as it may, invest the creators, organizers, directors, legislators, and controllers of society with a terrible responsibility. He is therefore most exacting with them. He who would dare to undertake the political creation of a people ought to believe that he can, in a manner of speaking, transform human nature, transform each individual, by whom he himself is a solidarity of perfect whole, to a mere part of a greater whole, from which the individual will henceforth receive his life and being. Thus, the person who would undertake the political creation of a people should believe in his ability to alter man's constitution, to strengthen it, to substitute for a physical and independent existence received from nature, an existence which is partial and moral. In short, he would be creator of political man, must remove man's own force and endow him with others that are naturally alien to him. Poor human nature, what would become of a person's dignity if it weren't trusted to the followers of Rousseau? This is really interesting, too, because maybe I did read this last time and I wrote it down because I wanted to read it again. And I think I said this to you guys Wednesday. This reads almost exactly what the doctrines of fascism state about humanity and how an individual human being does not exist within history outside of the state, which is an absurd concept, because states came later, folks. Governments came far later, so human beings existed. Bottom line. Now we could talk about the historical record, and perhaps that's what he's talking about, but what he was trying to make the real case of was, you little pleb, you are nothing without us. You're nothing without us. And we are the force of good. It's megalomania, folks. Legislators desire to mold mankind. Now let's examine Reinal on his subject of mankind being molded by the legislators. The legislator must first consider the climate, the air, and the soil, the resources at his disposal, determine his duties. He must first consider his locality. A population living on maritime shores must have laws designed for navigation. If it is an island settlement, the legislator must make his plans according to the nature of fertility of the soil. It is, especially in the distribution of property, that the genius of the legislator will be found. Really? I don't think so. As a general rule, when a new colony is established in any country, sufficient land should be given to each man to support his family. Sure, but why is it given to him? Why does anyone have a right to that land except for the person who is investing their labor into it. On an uncultivated island that you are populating with children, you need to do nothing but let the seeds of truth germinate along with the development of reason. What? I don't even know what that means. That seems absurd. That is the Rousseauian idea, though, the noble savage. They'll just develop. There doesn't need to be any sort of society or any correction. We don't need to teach our children anything. It'll just happen naturally. But when you resettle a nation with a past into a new country, the skill of the legislator rests in the policy of permitting the people to retain no injurious opinions and customs which can possibly be cured and corrected. If you desire to prevent these options and customs from becoming permanent, you will secure the second generation by a general system of public education for the children. A prince or a legislator should never establish a colony without first arranging to send wise men along to instruct the youth. In a new colony, ample opportunity is open to a careful legislator who desires to purify the customs and manners of the people. How do you do that, though, without being a tyrant? How do you mold people without being a tyrant? And I mean, I know how to do it as a parent, but that's different. And at a certain point, you have to understand that your child is at an age of accountability, and you know that you have to let them go and do their own things. If he has virtue and genius, the land and his people at his disposal will inspire his soul with a plan for society. Will it? Because some of these people had virtue and genius to their minds, like Hitler and Mussolini, Stalin, Mao. What happened there? A writer can only vaguely trace the plan in advance because it is necessarily subject to the instability of all hypotheses. The problem has many forms, complications, and circumstances that are difficult to foresee and settle in detail. Raynell's instruction to the legislator, on the other hand, to manage people may be compared to a professor of agriculture lecturing his students. The climate is the first rule for the farmer. His resources determine to his procedure. He must first consider his locality. If his soil is clay, he must do so and so. If his soil is sand, he must act in another manner. Every facility is open to the farmer who wishes to clear and improve his soil. If he is skillful enough, the manure at his disposal will suggest to him a plan of operation. A professor can only vaguely trace his plan in advance because it is necessarily subject to the instability of all hypotheses. The problem has many forms, complications, and circumstances that are difficult to foresee and settle in detail. And then Bastiat says, "Oh, sublime writers, please remember sometime that this clay, this sand, and this manure, which you are so arbitrarily dispose of, are men. They are your equals. They are intelligent and free human beings like yourselves. As you have, they too have received from God the faculty to observe, to plan ahead, to think, and to judge for themselves." And I'll stop there, 2 minutes shy of 5:30. Guys, I just had a thought while I was reading this. And that was, I'm not saying I'll do this anytime soon. That was maybe, and I did say something to my wife earlier when I walked off, maybe I will not necessarily do super long streams, but perhaps I'll start streaming at various times throughout the day if I can get my schedule up, and that way I can talk, or my schedule regulated, which is getting a little bit better, or has been pretty good, until, or so I can cover different subjects until the baby comes, of course. So all the things that I want to talk about that I wish you guys would hear could be addressed in maybe more precise ways. So just a thought. All right, guys. So just checking up on stuff. No one has sent any chats in forever, so no worries if you guys are just listening. I know a lot of you dropped out. I'm sure somebody cooler than me is streaming right now. Or you have stuff to do. Either way, guys, I appreciate you being here. Seriously, consider sharing this out somewhere or another. Consider, if you know a like-minded individual or someone who you think would find this interesting, please consider sharing it out. Like, share, subscribe if you are new. I really do want to grow the channel. Again, it'll happen over time, but I am fighting the algorithm here. Still loosening? Still listening. Okay. I got you, Shelly. No, I can see there are people watching. I get that with I get, stream analytics and stuff. I'm just saying I had a few more viewers, but people have to go do things. I mean, I get it. I come in the streams and drop off all the time. So not a big deal. But I do appreciate you all. And I appreciate like you, Shelly, Sam, Holly, Dollhawk, Val, all of you that watch me like daily. It's keeps me going. Ooh, Holly's about to put out a new video. You want to edit my videos? Because I find editing tedious, which is why I don't do it. In any case, guys, I'm going to get out of here. Appreciate you all once again. I hope to see you on Monday. I probably won't do anything this weekend, but I might collect a lot of information and get it organized so I can do multiple streams. So maybe what I'll do is try and focus on certain topics. Talk more religious talk in the morning, maybe. Do this in the afternoon and then have like a later evening stream. We'll see. We'll see what I want to do. But I'll be able to cover a lot more information then. I'm always wanting to talk about these issues and these things. But again, time is not on my side anymore as we are getting into the final weeks of my wife's pregnancy, and it's just going to be hard. Yeah, no doubt you understand, Holly. Like fighting the algorithm. Look, guys, I had other plans for other streams, other things, other channels. Like I'd love to do a cooking channel. I guarantee you that would blow up overnight. And I make pretty good food. So, and I got a lot of tricks and tips that aren't common. Cooking channels are innocuous, right? They're not political. So the algorithm probably picked that right up. Love to do a fitness channel if I could maintain my fitness regime. But, I got some wear and tear, achy knees and a bum hip that forever I'm rehabbing, or at least trying to keep mobile and healthy. But again, that those things tend to go on the wayside when I get bouts of insomnia. In any case, yeah, I mean, those are things. I'm not like this. Doing YouTube's not a like in any way a plan for me to be like financially stable or secure. I would assume the minute that I would get there, trying to build a YouTube channel would be the minute I would get yeeted. So why? Why? This can't be a primary. For me, I'm hoping that the book I'm in the process of writing, that I'm really going to be focusing on here very soon, like hardcore. I'm hoping that will bring in like a decent income. And given that I am seeing this in my head as a series, a small trilogy, if you would, that might be 3 years of income. And it's probably going to be, I would assume, even if the book does average, would be more income than I've probably ever made in 1 year in my life. So I should have tried to self-publish years ago, but whatever. I know more folks now. I have better insight. And the world is so much more interesting today. It really is. Trump really made everything interesting. In the Trump derangement syndrome and in this political persecution, I don't like that these folks are in jail right now because they walked through the Capitol building. But the world is in an interesting spot as someone who observes and thinks about things a lot. So it's a hell of a time to be alive. I'll put it that way. And the world is not on a good path. But part of me is a little bit fatalist, not completely, but in that, I believe that these are the things that are supposed to come because I have religious beliefs, and some of these things are, thousands-year-old predictions. So they are in the Bible. In any case, guys, time for me to get out of here. So once again, thank you for watching. Please hit that like button. Please share somewhere if there's someone that will listen. Even if it's a private message to a friend on Facebook, if you can bring them over. In fact, I should do that more. I should send out more. I know some of my friends know that I do this, but none of them watch me that I'm aware of. We're always living in a moment of history, Holly. But good enough point there. All right. Thank you all for watching once again. I will see you all on Monday. This has been All Minus One. In case you didn't know, I'm Bill, and I wish you all well.